This is CB Up for Discussion, a podcast series from Community Business where we tackle DE&I and wellbeing hot topics with special guests from across Asia.
Hello, I'm Emily Moss, Head of Social Impact at Community Business, and I'll be your podcast host for this episode. Today, we're delighted to be up for discussion with Olivia Cotes-James, founder of LUÜNA Naturals. LUÜNA Naturals is on a mission to end period poverty, destigmatize menstruation, and advance gender equality throughout Asia. They produce healthy and sustainable period products, as well as working with businesses to educate and build awareness for the gender health gap. As a purpose-driven organization, LUÜNA works to create a positive social impact, collaborating with grassroots charities and organizations to support underserved and vulnerable communities. Olivia herself is a formidable entrepreneur with accolades that include the 2023 Cartier Impact Initiative, Asia Femtech Influencer of the Year 2023, Forbes 30 Under 30, Class of 2021, Hong Kong Entrepreneur of the Year 2021, and Shanghai Young Business Leader of the Year 2020. Liv, thank you for joining us on Up for Discussion.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
To start us off, can you talk us through your entrepreneurial journey to date, why you founded your company, the highs and lows, and particularly any thoughts you have on the journey for female entrepreneurs?
Well, what I particularly love about you asking me this question, Emily, is that you were around in the early days before LUÜNA existed as a business in the early days of ideation and community building. So I'm happy to be sharing this story with you and your audience today. I always start by saying that LUÜNA was born out of such an incredibly personal story. And for many women and menstruating people who are listening today, they might see many parts of my own story reflected in theirs. So I was in my mid-20s living in Hong Kong when I initially had, I suppose, the first spark of the idea that became LUÜNA. And that was really just realizing for the first time how absurd it was that as a woman in my mid-20s, I was still struggling with menstruation over a decade after having my first period. And I started to, for the first time ever, really question the confusion, loneliness, and embarrassment that I had felt around my menstrual cycle for so many years. It was really in Shanghai, where I moved in 2016, that initial questioning of that stigma really evolved into initially a community. So you might remember I was using WeChat to promote these little impromptu casual meetings that I would host for total strangers after work and on the weekends, where people would come together to talk about periods. And lots of people who saw me doing this questioned whether anybody would turn up to talk to a group of complete strangers about menstruation. But the amazing thing was that people did, and those sessions grew into a community of people who were looking to have conversations around not just menstruation, but other areas of our bodies and lives that as modern women are still so stigmatized to this day. And so in those first few years, LUÜNA was really just that, a community that wanted to drive change through education and support. And through that community, I saw just how powerful this idea of conversation was in really overcoming these deep-rooted stigmas and taboos that so many of us have lived with for so long. But during that time, I suppose I started to look more at the role that the traditional so-called feminine care industry played in contributing to these stigmas and the outdated status quo around menstruation. And ultimately came to realize that some of my most debilitating menstrual symptoms, for example, my recurring yeast infections that had plagued me for years, and as you may know, are very uncomfortable and ultimately very expensive to treat as well. I came to realize that the pads and tampons that I had been using that contained synthetics and plastics had actually been causing those yeast infections. And that was really, I suppose, frustrating, maddening, actually, to realize that for many years I had been blaming my body for symptoms that were the result of an industry that lacks the transparency it should have. And so upon that realization, our attention shifted towards looking at not just community and not just education, but also the creation of physical products as well, giving people who menstruate an option that is healthier, safer, better for the planet, and ultimately led by transparency as well. And it was after bringing those three pillars together that LUÜNA was officially launched in 2019.
Great, thank you for that. And yeah, it is amazing because when I remember, as you say, the informal version of LUÜNA, if you like, maybe even before it was called LUÜNA, I can't remember, it was sort of groundbreaking, particularly in mainland China, to have those conversations. And I think, well, I mean, we'll go on to talk a little bit more about stigma, etc. But yeah, it's really refreshing my memory about where you've come from as well. So it's really great to hear that. So at Community Business, we believe in the power of business to make a positive social impact. And I know obviously that is really part of your work at LUÜNA. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you are creating a positive social impact? And do you see any challenges with maintaining that as your business grows?
I really appreciate the way you framed that question, and alongside my passion being to eradicate menstrual stigma and gender equality, I really am passionate about social enterprise and this idea that businesses should integrate their commitment to doing good throughout their operations. And particularly where we operate, I think social enterprise, the notion of social enterprise is still a little bit misunderstood. Lots of people, we're an NGO, for example, and we have to sort of explain that, no, we are what we consider to be this new type of business that we hope eventually will become the norm, that considers in equal measure people, planet, and purpose. So to dig into what that means for LUÜNA, I mean, as you can see for anyone watching this on my screen, we are B Corp certified, which was something we achieved in 2022, which means that, yes, our business operations have been vetted to meet strict standards of social and environmental impact. So if you take our physical product range, for example, we work with experts throughout the supply chain to create products that are as environmentally friendly as possible. Now, we have been able to make upgrades to that product line throughout the years, sometimes at the cost of short-term revenue, but with this notion that we are committed to reducing our environmental footprint as much as possible. And especially in the case of our reusable products and the education that we provide around switching to reusable alternatives, I think there you can see that we are really trying to provide education and support for people to choose ultimately much more environmentally friendly alternatives when they are ready. And when it comes to the social side of our business, as a social enterprise, our business model is to allocate a portion of all revenue from all partnerships to funding the provision of products and education to vulnerable local communities who need it to tackle period poverty. So the latest report around global period poverty actually highlights that around 500 million people around the globe cannot access menstrual products when they need them. This could be due to financial constraints. It could be in the situation of climate disasters where people cannot access these kind of products when they need them. And of course, as a result, people who menstruate are removed from participating in society during menstruation, or, you know, in the case of our communities here in Hong Kong, due to financial restrictions, they are unable to attend school or work during menstruation. So this is an issue. Period poverty is really an issue that does hinder the advancement of women, girls, and menstruating people around the world. And like I said, our business model means that for every, you know, big corporate or school that puts our period products in the washrooms or hires us to provide menstrual equity training, they know that that action is directly contributing to providing equivalent services to vulnerable communities.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's so interesting because obviously, so I'm, for those listening, based in Europe, and we, you know, we're seeing this conversation globally, right, about access in schools, how it's impacting girls and their education and stuff. So it's not just an Asia conversation, and it's being had globally, which I think is really interesting because so many gender issues, yes, they impact women differently in different parts of the world, but many of them affect, you know, everyone. So yeah, it's great to see. And I suppose from a business perspective, I guess I'm just reflecting on the fact that you can start as a social enterprise, you can start the way that you mean to go on. So, you know, we work a lot with businesses as well, and often it's undoing work that's been done to make, you know, to improve. Whereas when you're starting with a business that is purpose driven, you can set those best practices from the get-go, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say, of course, that our programs to achieve our mission have not evolved and changed over time. This has been such a steep and continuous learning curve. And I think where we are today, through working with various different charity organizations and social impact experts, I think we're at a really exciting point where we can take, you know, almost 5 years now of learning how to best serve these underserved communities that we work with and put those into practice. So I'm very excited about how those specific programs take shape moving forwards.
And I mean, that actually leads us really nicely on to our next question, which is about social mobility, which is our major campaign at Community Business this year. And we're trying to look at social mobility through all its different facets and the way that it intersects in so many parts of life and work. So could you talk a little bit more about your outreach programs for underserved communities and access to healthcare and wellness, maybe from the perspective of social mobility and the impact that you've seen?
Yeah, certainly. We work and have worked with a cross-section of charities. Just referring to Hong Kong alone, we've worked with organisations that represent the refugee community here, the migrant domestic worker community here, the homeless community. And I think it's really important to bear in mind that the challenges with regards to period poverty faced within all of these different beneficiary groups can look similar, and they can look very, very different. And so what LUÜNA really focuses on is learning as best we can from the experts, the charity partners, learning as best we can directly from the beneficiaries themselves, how we can work with them to achieve the goal of improving their relationship with their period. And that is fundamentally what we're trying to do here. It would be wrong to say that our mission is to give period products to people that can't afford them. That is one part of our overall goal, which is to shift somebody's relationship with their period so they feel like it no longer holds them back. And as we touched upon, that is as true for somebody working in a big global corporate that we work with to a beneficiary from one of our charity partners. So from different communities, this looks very different. Our ultimate goal would be to remove the barriers that prevent individuals exploring all different types of products, particularly reusable products, which we think are not only the best for the planet, but also provide a financially sustainable option for community members as well. So we really see reusables as being central to our long-term mission of overcoming period poverty. But of course, the steps to get there, there are many, many steps before we get there. And so education is really pivotal. We run regular workshops alongside the distribution of products. We run regular webinars with different communities. Again, not just about the products, but providing information about menstruation so that it no longer has to feel like a burden. And we've been able to see some really fantastic results stemming from this work. Of course, we can talk about the amount of products that we've donated, but I think statistics like, I'll give you an example, with one charity collaboration in Hong Kong, we actually saw a 27% reduction in young girls from ethnic minority communities missing school because of menstruation.
Yeah.
When we talk about social mobility, obviously attending school and getting the education that you want and deserve is so central to that. And I think too often people, because this conversation is so stigmatized still, they don't see the association between menstrual stigma and missing out on opportunities like work and school.
Yeah. And I mean, even just the sort of, maybe confidence isn't the right word, but just feeling empowered enough to attend school, feel comfortable in yourself while you're menstruating is something that maybe I didn't take it for granted. Maybe I felt nervous on those days when I was at school, you know, but it's not something that's held me back, right? But if it is holding people back, I think it's the hard things like the actual access to education and you know, getting those sort of technical skills, but also just the social impact on your outlook on yourself and your positive well-being. It's really holistic.
It really is. And a really key pillar to what we're trying to do as well is inspire body autonomy. And when you look beyond just the idea of period poverty, but you also look more broadly at the gender health gap and how many women, girls, and menstruating people have their menstrual symptoms dismissed time and time again, and therefore miss signs of underlying health conditions and then experience the consequences of those undiagnosed health conditions. You start to see that, you know, talking about periods, talking about what is normal, what is not normal, what you should, you know, insist upon getting support from, even when doctors turn you away as just having quote unquote bad periods. This can be genuinely life-saving stuff we're talking about here. And so it's really about taking control of your own health and well-being, as well as, you know, solving specifically this issue of period poverty.
Being an advocate for yourself is something that throughout the sort of woman's health life cycle, if we think about, you know, I've just given birth recently, and that's where I had to find my voice, because I haven't really had health problems before. I was actually very lucky with my experience with periods. So it was only when I was in this situation where I thought, God, I've actually never been in a hospital for myself before, you know, and I'm in my mid-30s. And it was then I had to find my voice. And I think if you're, you know, I was 30, I was in a comfortable environment, but if you're 15 or 13 and you're on your own and the experience of being able to advocate for yourself, I don't think you can never be too young to find that, I think.
Oh, and I've got goosebumps in the way that you phrased it there, because there are countless examples I can share from our community, from all different groups within our community, whereby people were only had their endometriosis or their PCOS diagnosed during what were infertility struggles. And the same way that you just mentioned, we are only exploring our health fully when it comes to fertility and pregnancy. And yet this means that for years prior to that, individuals are in pain or suffering. And again, as I said earlier, being dismissed as having quote unquote just bad period pain. Like, there is no such thing as just bad period pain.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, you know, we could talk about, you know, the whole cycle, menopause, and you know, pain relief during childbirth. There are so many things that women are dismissed for throughout their lives. And I just think, you know, this starting the education young and really thinking about how you, yeah, as you said, gain bodily autonomy early. It's just, I just love this idea. I think it's so important. And it actually does kind of lead me on to my next question, which was going to be about tackling taboos in gender health. I wondered if, you know, since you've really been talking about this topic for nearly 10 years now, certainly 7-8 years, informally and formally, have you noticed any shifts in attitudes? Do you still feel like there's a taboo? I mean, I'm thinking in the region, market specific, but also kind of workplace versus general society, you know.
Absolutely. When we were starting out, we were ignored for years by media, by brand collaborators, you know, influencers who have since messaged us to admit to, you know, finding this topic too awkward to touch and be involved in. And each one of those segments that I just mentioned have, since we first started, come back to not only say, yes, we will give you a platform or we will collaborate with you, but actually want to be part of the conversation. Yeah. So globally, we call it the menstrual movement, because that's exactly what it is. It's evolved, it's grown, it's become more mainstream. That said, in the spaces that LUÜNA primarily works within, let's say the corporate workspace or schools or underserved communities, every day we are reminded of how much work there is to do. Every day we have somebody who tells us that this is not appropriate for the workplace, or that, you know, gets uncomfortable with the topic that we're sharing about.
And I think, you know, at Community Business, we see so much progress in so many areas of diversity and inclusion. But we also, as you say, are reminded daily that there is so much work to be done. And I think, you know, I can pick out examples of progress that we've seen. And one that I always return to is our work on mental health. And I can actually use the phrase mental health because when we started having this conversation, people wouldn't touch mental health. We had to talk about emotional well-being and resilience. And they said, no, we don't want to talk about mental health. It's too stigmatized. And now, and I do think COVID played a big part in that, but now, you know, the doors are open to this conversation and people are having really advanced conversations in the workplace as well, and appreciating the impact of social well-being, work-life balance, etc. All of these things within this sort of ecosystem of one's mental health at work and at home. So I think, you know, it's great to celebrate. And I think if we can apply that lens to whether it be LGBT inclusion at work or whether it's gender health, etc., you know, I really hope to see more systemic change. I think celebrating the wins as you do and our marking, which is amazing, and you've got these statistics to back it up, but also looking ahead at the journey. Yeah, I'm just kind of reflecting on it because I think it's so interesting that you can see progress, but it's just not fast enough.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of the way you just spoke about the evolution of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and what I find in the work that we do is still sometimes, and this is possibly one of the most frustrating reactions we get, is the idea or the question that we get, which is, well, if we're going to do this for half of the workforce, what about the other half? And I really want to see a wider, and I know it is changing, but a wider acknowledgement that when these initiatives are done well, you are not just doing something for half the workforce or the half of the workforce that menstruate. You are breaking down the barriers for all people to discuss, seek support for previously taboo issues, and that is applicable to every single person in the workplace. That is applicable to people who are going through mental health issues as well. It is, you know, as they say, equity is not, it's not a pie. When you take a slice for one group, there isn't less for the others. It should contribute to building that overall inclusive and open culture where everyone can thrive. but I still find that we come up against that idea of, well, if we do this, there'll be less fun to go round for others.
Yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? Because you want to include men, I suppose, in the conversation, but you also they need to come on the journey as well, don't they? So it's about their hearts and minds, and so much of DE&I is about that, I think. Understanding and humanizing what can become in the press quite kind of controversial or emotive topics, and it's remembering that there's people and pain often at the heart of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Humanizing it, and a big part of the way LUÜNA are approaching it is imbuing it with joy.
Yeah.
You know, I couldn't do what I do every day if our work wasn't filled with joy. There's obviously challenges and struggles, but I don't want to talk about periods for an hour and a half if it just feels like a biology lesson from back at school, right? Like, it has to feel fun, it has to feel engaging. And I was smiling earlier when you were sort of referencing the idea of being covert in the language that you used to use around mental health, obviously to get your foot in the door and then talk about the topic at hand. We still to this day have to do that now. And sometimes, you know, strategizing with ERG teams who know that the people at the top aren't ready to hear the word menstruation or menopause. And so we come in under the guise of delivering a broad well-being workshop. And then, you know, surprise, we're talking about menstruation today. But because it's fun, because it's engaging, nobody feeling scared or attacked. And ultimately, because everybody in that room will have a menstruating person that they love and care about in their life, we are able to really humanize it in that really personal way.
So I wanted to move on a little bit and talk about something you mentioned earlier, which was your sustainable period products, such as your menstrual cup and any other products that you have. Do you still encounter bias or taboo for these topics in the region, and what is your path to combat that? I'd love to hear more about what the uptake has been and what the journey to get there has been.
There's certainly still a stigma around the reusable products across the board, not just those that we make, but our peers in the industry will be experiencing the same thing. And I like to always share when I'm talking about reusables the journey that I've been on, and you can tell how much my opinion about menstruation has changed. When I first heard about the existence of a menstrual cup 7-8 years ago, I really felt it was quite an awful notion. You know, a cup in your vagina, that sounded awful to me. And so I absolutely firsthand feel those who are cautious about these types of products. And of course, education is really the key here. And we always point out when we're talking about reusable products, we always stress that this isn't like talking about somebody using a plastic straw, in which case I think shame is probably quite an effective tool for change. Shaming people around using plastic cups or plastic straws, fine. But when it comes to menstrual health products, shame will only ever result in us further hiding our products up our sleeve. It will never be the tool to inspire change. And so education and patience is really what we lead with. And LUÜNA's mission is ultimately, and I really do mean this, not to get people to convert to using LUÜNA menstrual cups. It really is to remove the barriers that individuals like myself 8 years ago feel towards trying all of the options that are available to you. You know, we don't yet make reusable underwear, for example. But in our workshops, we will absolutely talk about the existence of these products, because our goal is to leave every single person at that workshop feeling compelled and informed enough to go out and try all the options available to find what best suits them, ultimately going back to that core mission that we have, which is to really improve people's relationship with their periods. So that the stigma around reusables is still quite high. I would say it's absolutely changing, not just through the work that LUÜNA does, but also other players in the industry. But it really is everybody's job to destigmatize this topic. one of the most powerful events we've ever done was around this time last year for International Menstrual Health Day 2023. We got a large room full of our corporate clients, and we had our student ambassadors come and talk to them about the fact that they had implemented these initiatives within their school. And a lot of the audience members obviously were familiar with LUÜNA and the work that we do because they're one of our clients already. But people were so moved. There were a couple of people who were actually in tears in the audience, seeing that young boys alongside their female peers are championing this kind of movement within their schools. Because for people of our generation and older, this is unheard of, boys standing up in front of an audience and advocating for menstrual equity. So that's really cool. And I think that's some of the best work that we do.
Yeah, I mean, and to continue, if that can continue, if I think about, the challenges that we've faced at community business, even talking about women on boards and taking men on that journey in a very corporate kind of, linear sense, if you're bringing those men up and into the conversation and they continue with that open mindset, then the knock-on effects could be enormous. And I wanted to talk about the kind of Western lens versus, experiences you've had working with people in Hong Kong and mainland China or other markets in Asia. So I suppose an obvious dynamic is the fact that you and I are both from the UK. Well, I mean, I was an expat in Hong Kong. You still are. Have you seen any cultural nuances that have surprised you over the last few years? Can you speak a little bit about privilege and what role you think that plays in the conversation and how you address it as LUÜNA?
I feel that, of course, there's cultural nuance, and even within, when people say that we're tackling menstrual stigma or promoting, menstrual equity in Asia, that's another example, I think, of people treating Asia as this one monolith, which it is absolutely not. And just within that one term of Asia, there are so many different cultural nuances that need to be acknowledged within this conversation. So certainly this conversation looks very different in many ways to how it does in the West. And then again, within that, many different nuances to consider. I would say that I don't know that I've been surprised by anything that we have encountered, perhaps because before LUÜNA existed as a company, so much research and community on the ground in these local markets had been done. So nothing has surprised me, but localization is and will continue to be absolutely key for this mission to take hold, to be successful. And the importance of local partners on the ground, again, particularly when you're looking at working with underserved communities, local partners who really do understand the culture within those communities, indeed ambassadors from those beneficiary groups to lead these initiatives is so important. I mean, when there have been a lack of resources, my team and I will absolutely go in and deliver these sessions. But the absolute ideal scenario is that we have passionate ambassadors from these different communities who care about the mission, have experienced the positive impact of our programs themselves, and can advocate that to their friends and community members. We are not the best people to come in and deliver that education on a wider scale. That's just never going to be effective. So the reliance on localized partnerships and ambassadors is really key in the work that we do.
So just to end our conversation, community business is all about creating a ripple of change throughout society and throughout our communities. So we like to ask all of our guests what you think the biggest ripple of change that people listening can make today.
In the work that LUÜNA does, we really like to emphasize the importance of everyday activism. And I'd like to encourage anybody listening to see the possibility of them immediately after listening to this podcast as having the ability to drive everyday activism around menstrual equity. So that could be anything from not lowering your voice when you talk about menstruation next time, or when you hear that a colleague or a friend is suffering from menstrual cramps, resisting the urge to turn away and think this conversation isn't for me, but just treating them as you would with any other struggle that they would be having and asking, are you okay? It might not seem like a big deal, but I promise you it's these small little bits of everyday activism that collectively can contribute to driving period equity for all.
Great.
Cool.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on Up for Discussion.
Thank you for listening to CB Up for Discussion. For more information about our work across Asia, head to the Community Business website.